It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. After many months of bilateral tensions that have reverberated around the world, especially here in the Indo-Pacific, the United States and China have been aiming to find a way to lay aside some of their differences and cooperate on common challenges. But can they find that breakthrough moment? We turn to Ambassador J. Stapleton Roy, a career American diplomat who served over 4 decades with distinction in the Foreign Service and at overseas embassies in Asia. Ambassador Roy was stationed in Moscow in the 1960s, later in Taipei, and he helped set up the American embassy in Beijing, and also participated in the secret negotiations that led to the establishment of US-China relations. Of course, after that, he joined later the Kissinger Associates and served as the founding director of the Woodrow Wilson International Center's Kissinger Institute on China and the United States. Welcome, Ambassador Roy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you on our show, and especially with all this, all this anticipation and a lot of worry and concern surrounding the bilateral tensions here between the US and China here in the Indo-Pacific. And well, this month we saw the Biden-Xi virtual summit take place, and well, to be honest, the atmosphere there, it seemed nothing like the rather acrimonious mood between Secretaries of State Antony Blinken and Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Alaska earlier this year. And President Xi Jinping actually said that it was good to see his old friend, President Biden. So it might, well, the whole exchange may not have been the kind of breakthrough that you helped achieve between President Nixon and Mao Zedong. But do you see any potential for the two leaders to reset the tone for bilateral engagement?
Yes, you are right. The tone of the virtual summit meeting between President Biden and President Xi Jinping of China was greatly improved over the previous exchanges between the two sides. Both sides clearly wish to stabilize the relationship and halt any further drift toward conflict. The summit was not intended to produce agreements, but there were some significant accomplishments. Missing, however, was any progress on economic and trade issues, a very important omission. On the difficult issue of Taiwan, President Biden reaffirmed that the United States would stick to its one China policy and would not support independence for Taiwan, while the Chinese side warned the United States side against crossing red lines with respect to Taiwan. Immediately after the summit, the two sides eased restrictions on journalists. So this outcome was better than expected. The atmosphere has definitely improved, but the relationship is still on shaky ground. Hard work lies ahead.
Right, so a much better tone, but no real tangible improvements just yet. And well, Ambassador, since birth, you've seen China in many different forms, and now China is under its leader, who some call its forever president, Xi Jinping. And well, what's your assessment of Xi Jinping's vision for China on the world stage, and how do you think he's going to handle US-China relations as long as he's in power?
Xi Jinping is committed to having China gain the wealth and power to rank among the top countries of the world. His behavior reflects this determination. He has not yet demonstrated that his vision of a revitalized China will permit Chinese citizens to have the freedoms enjoyed by the citizens of other major modern countries. This is Xi Jinping's biggest challenge. For China to be a truly modern country, it needs a modern political system to shore up its legitimacy.
And over the years, there were hopes that China might change, and maybe, even in recent months, that the US and China could agree to cooperate on some areas like climate change or North Korea. But, well, according to the Pentagon's report, China has been expanding its nuclear capabilities at alarming speeds, and it, in fact, plans to modernize its military by 2027 in order to coerce Taiwan into talks. Do you think the US could still have a working relationship with China amid these military tensions and fundamental differences on Taiwan and human rights?
The answer is we can. We retained a working relationship with the Soviet Union throughout the Cold War. I served in Moscow during the height of the Cold War, and we had regular interactions with Moscow. A full-scale war between major powers, major nuclear powers, is unthinkable, and both sides have a compelling interest in preventing military conflicts. China may be able to coerce Taiwan to remain within a one-China framework, but coercive unification would be a disaster for both the China mainland and Taiwan. A conflict would have the potential to set back China's remarkable economic advances over the last 40 years. At the summit, the two presidents agreed on the need for strategic stability conversations. This is a positive development that takes into account China's rapid development of a larger nuclear arsenal.
Well, it seems that the US has been pushing China for talks nuclear on arms control with Moscow, but it seems that Beijing has been, maybe disregarding these efforts. Do you think there's a possibility of them actually coming to the table and talking about it?
We don't know the answer to that question yet. We did not know whether, if the issue of strategic stability talks was raised with President Xi Jinping, he would indicate willingness to engage with us on that subject. The two sides were, however, able to reach agreement to start such conversations. But we can't tell how far the Chinese will be willing to go. You are right that before this, the Chinese have been very resistant to being pulled into the type of conversations that the United States has regularly had with Russia.
Well, during the summit, the virtual summit earlier this month, Presidents Joe Biden and Xi Jinping, they also discussed North Korea, according to the White House. And while some pundits think that China is going to use Pyongyang as a leverage against Washington, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, do you think there are any ways that the US and China could cooperate on North Korea?
The answer is yes. China's interests are not served by having a nuclear North Korea. But China is always going to be an important factor in managing relations with Pyongyang. It cannot, in my judgment, use North Korea as leverage on either the United States or on South Korea. Nor should the United States and South Korea ignore China's interest in how relations with Pyongyang are managed. All three capitals need to show an interest in lowering tensions on the Korean Peninsula. At some point, multilateral talks are going to be necessary again, but at the moment, it's not clear that they are possible to occur in a productive way.
Well, when it comes to dealing with North Korea, South Korea and the US, they seem to be on different pages at the moment in regards to engaging with the Pyongyang regime. And while President Moon Jae-in in South Korea, he's been pushing for an end of war declaration, while Washington officials are more reserved about the idea. What do you think is the best way forward for dealing with the Kim Jong-un regime?
A split between Washington and Seoul on dealing with North Korea would damage the interests of both countries. It is illusionary for the United States to think that we can have a Korea policy that doesn't take into account the attitude of the South Korean government. In my view, if there are differences over how to engage with Pyongyang, they should be managed through close consultations between the two allies, not by unilateral actions.
And well, in terms of engagement with the Indo-Pacific area in general, former President Donald Trump, he decided to pull out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, which many believed would cause the US to lose some of its economic footing here in the Indo-Pacific. And Mr. Trump's America First trade policies, of course, it created tensions with some of the US's closest allies as he introduced tariffs on steel, aluminium. He also ripped up FTAs, and he complained quite a lot about US trade deficits, as we remember. But, over the past year, we haven't seen major reversals of such policies. Why isn't President Biden rejoining the now CPTPP, for instance, or taking a significantly different approach to trade?
President Trump made an enormous mistake in pulling the United States out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The biggest flaw in the United States' approach to the Indo-Pacific at the moment, including in the Biden administration, is the absence of an economic strategy. President Biden is aware of the problem, but he has not yet shown how he will handle it. The United States must also recognize the significance of the enormous trade that regional countries, including our close friends and allies, have with China. Efforts to divide the region into blocs will not serve U.S. interests. It seems to me that the United States has got to formulate as quickly as possible an economic strategy for the region, because regional countries want us not just involved in the region in a military sense. They don't want to be dominated economically by China, and that means they need the U.S. economic presence as a balancing factor. I hope this problem will show some progress in the near future.
Well, it seems that there are, we're seeing sparks of efforts to do that. Most US allies in the Indo-Pacific and countries in the ASEAN bloc, they are, of course, major trading partners of China and part of its Belt and Road Initiative. But the Biden administration has presented the Build Back Better World plan and various forms of Quad or Quad Plus kind of collaborations to engage with countries in the region. Do you think this will be the way forward? I mean, what should the US's long-term goals for engagement in the Indo-Pacific look like?
I think the United States and China are both going to be major factors in the Indo-Pacific for the indefinite future. And that means our strategy must allow for the fact that if China and the United States are not working together to try to produce peace and stability and prosperity in the region, then we will be working against the interests of the regional countries, and that's not a good strategy. A United States problem is that we have permitted attitudes to turn very negative toward globalization. Sooner or later, this administration and administrations that come after the Biden administration are going to have to try to alter U.S. domestic views on economic engagement with the world. Backing out of TPP was a major setback for U.S. interests, as I said, and I think the sooner the United States can re-engage itself productively and economically in the Indo-Pacific region, the better it will be for all of us. And I am very explicit. Here I differ from the administration. I think actions that serve to divide the region rather than to enable multilateral cooperation in the region is the wrong approach to take. The countries of the region do not want to be asked to choose between China and the United States, and U.S. policy has tended much too much in that direction. I think it's a mistake, and I hope that the Biden administration will straighten it out.
Well, it looks like President Biden might have some challenge on his hands getting his allies to work together as well, because over the past month we saw a trilateral meeting taking place in Washington, D.C., where you are between Seoul, Washington and Tokyo, but it ended without the scheduled joint conference due to the ongoing conflict between South Korea and Japan over historical issues. And Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, she held the presser alone, but she did, of course, insist that the talks had been friendly and productive. Do you see any hope for improvement of relations between South Korea and Japan, or ways that the US can foster cooperation between them?
All countries have difficulty dealing with historical factors. The United States is still struggling with the consequences of our Civil War. And you see this every day in the newspapers because much of our current difficulties are related to issues that were intensified by the Civil War. The European Union has demonstrated, however, the advantages of overcoming such difficulties. This required strong leadership by good leaders. This is a problem that Seoul and Tokyo must overcome, and in my view, good leaders in both countries have the capability to put this bilateral relationship that's so important to the security of the region onto a stronger footing. The United States should consistently show that it favors better relations between Japan and South Korea, but it cannot force its two allies to get along. That's an issue that South Korea and Japan have to deal between themselves without interference by the United States, but it should be clear to both Tokyo and Seoul that the United States would prefer to have the relationship become more cordial than it is at the present time.
Well, it's been quite clear that in both countries, the bilateral relations, it's been very politicized, so hopefully we will see that start to fade away. But, well, before we let you go, Ambassador Roy, now South Korea, it often calls itself a shrimp squeezed between sharks, and that's, of course, alluding to its rather awkward position and the pressure it faces geopolitically squeezed between bigger powers. And, well, an optimistic spin on this is middle powership. Now, do you think South Korea can use its position and diplomatic tools to help promote regional peace and prosperity?
Yes, I do. The Korean Peninsula is vitally important to the interests not only of the Korean people, but also to its neighbors in China and Japan. But the Korean Peninsula is indeed squeezed between major powers, and these include also the United States and Russia as well. But this also makes it a central player in producing the peace and prosperity that will benefit all parties. In my view, South Korea can best play this role through a strong alliance and partnership with the United States aimed at promoting peace and stability. So there are two ways to think about being squeezed between sharks. One is that if the sharks are too powerful, obviously that puts you in a dangerous position. But at the same time, when you're in the middle of a situation, you have a remarkable ability to deal with all of the parties and to steer them in the right direction. And I think South Korea is a very successful country that has the capability and the authority to try to demonstrate to China, Japan, Russia, the United States, and North Korea that the best way to serve the interests of all parties is to get progress toward stronger peace on the Korean Peninsula.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Roy. Now, I must have misused the phrase. I said sharks instead of whales, but I asked for your understanding there. And well, thank you again. That was Ambassador J. Stapleton Roy. Again, wonderful to have you on our show all the way from Washington, D.C. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your presence.